And good afternoon. Welcome to the second session in this semester's Sunaikisis Digital Classics program. This semester is focused on digital approaches to cultural heritage, which includes many things outside of what are normally called classics, of course, but it's all part of the same program. And today's session is on museum data, access and metadata. And we have presentations and case studies from Paula Granados García from the British Museum and Susanne Töpfer from the Museo Egizio Torino. And we're going to look at two quite different kinds of museum and quite different kinds of what museum records and museum catalogues, museum data look like in the contexts of those museums and those collections and those projects. I just want to very quickly say this is while we're streaming live. If you're watching this live, please use the live chat. Say hi, let us know you're watching, but also feel free to ask questions or make comments at any time in the live chat. We will be seeing the live chat, and if there are any questions during or after the session, we can bring them up on the screen and we can address those questions. So please do join in the discussion with us. That's great. We'll also talk a little bit about the end about an exercise based on this session for those of you who are using this as part of classroom learning or self-directed learning for that matter, for an exercise for you to think about the issues that we've discussed in a bit more detail. If you're watching this, if you found this session on YouTube rather than via the Sunaikisis Digital Classics program, there is a link to the SunoikisisDC page for this session in the text immediately below the video. So you may need to see more, but you'll get some description and a link to the page which has readings and exercise and other information there for you. So please feel free to use that. All of this stuff is meant to be open and accessible to everybody. I think that's all I need to say by way of preamble. So I will hand over to Paula, who I think is going to talk a little bit first about her work on the Endangered Material Knowledge Project at the British Museum, and then after that, Susanne is going to talk about the Egyptian Museum. But over to Paula first.
Great, thank you very much, Gabby. So I am sharing my screen. If we can, I'm Paula, by the way, from the EMKP program at the British Museum, and so I will be presenting a little bit about museums in general and then focusing on museums data with a case study of the EMKP. So if we can share my screen, great. I'm going to presentation mode. Okay, great. So yeah, so today we will be talking about museums data, access and metadata. And so just to show you briefly the contents of today's session, I'll be speaking a little bit about museums, what is a museum and what do they collect and why. Then moving to museums data and formats, the distinction between data and metadata, and then the discussion on data availability, open access, reuse, copyright, and looking at the case studies of EMKP and the ones that Susanne will be talking about later, Museo of Torino, etc. So just to start very briefly, I'm sure you all know about this, but the word museum comes from the Greek museion, which was the temple of the muses, and so this was the place where they were like temples or buildings dedicated to the muses, and they were the places where the supplicants asked the muses to kind of protect and watch the academics, the artists, the poets, and so on. And these people tended to bring artifacts, offerings to these places, and they tended to accumulate there for people to see as a way of tribute to the muses. And so from that, we can move into the first museum of history, or with the earliest museum known label. And this was a museum created by the Princess Enigaldi Nanas. And here we can see this clay cylinder inscribed with 3 different languages that was found in the excavation of this palace in Iraq. And it's very nice because the cylinder had an explanation of an ancient artifact that we and the stand was next to this inscription, this clay cylinder, and it is considered kind of the earliest known museum label of history. Several other examples of accumulation of interesting objects and artifacts happen across history until the Renaissance, when the study of nature and the natural world was encouraged again between especially the aristocracy. This is the time when the curiosity cabinets started to emerge. And Susanne will pronounce this much better than me, but these are also very well known as Wunderkammers. And this is kind of the start of museums as we know them today. Related to this, there is, in the British Museum, there is the Enlightenment Room, which kind of recreates this idea of the cabinet of curiosities, which may be interesting to visit if you like this. This one is a depiction of Ole Worm's Cabinet of Curiosities, which was considered the first cabinet of this kind to kind of collect this sort of interesting artifacts and objects. And we can see here how they are displayed and grouped by type or relationship. Some of them have little labels explaining what they were. And so this is kind of an important, I've been kind of explaining very briefly through the history of museum from the beginning. But so let's go into a bit more like the current time, the contemporary world, and what is a museum. So the Film Museum in Chicago did a sort of interviews asking lots of people what they thought that a museum was, and they got many different answers. Some people said it was a place where you can see lots of things and objects, a place where the past lives, a place where you can learn, a place of knowledge, a collection of things from around the world, a place of learning, a place of wonders. So there were many, many different answers. And I think, in my view, a museum has as many definitions as people and visitors it has, because every person, in my perspective, has its own experience of the museum and engages differently with the museum. And I think museums are now moving towards this idea of engaging with the visitor and having allowing the visitor to have its own experience of it. A place of discovery as well. And this idea of many different experiences of museum, many different definitions, I think is nicely depicted here in this map of all the museums in the world, which is a visualization of a query of Wikidata, which we will speak about later in the year, but in the term. But it's this, well, we spoke about it last week as well, I think, the linked data database of Wikipedia. So and with a query you can actually ask for all the museums in the world and generate a map. And so I think this nicely kind of depicts the idea of several museums, several experiences, several ways of experience the museum and engage with the museum and its objects. However, if you want an actual definition of what a museum is, in 2007, the ICOM, which is the International Council of Museums, adopted this definition of what a museum is or should be, and they said a museum is a non-profit permanent institution in the service of society and its development, open to the public, which acquires, conserves, researches, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education, study, and enjoyment. And so I think we could agree with many of these, with a lot of the things that they say in here. We could even agree with the whole definition. However, since 2007, I think the world has changed, and it has changed especially a lot in the past 2 years. And this has happened because of COVID, as we all know, and the pandemic situation. And so, as we know, because of lockdown, museums had to close their physical buildings. And the closure of the museum buildings because of COVID and the lockdown had a significant impact in the museum's digital strategies, and especially their data strategies and their strategies to engage with the audience and engage with the public in general. And not only in some cases had an impact, but it also meant a total change of the perspective in which some museums started to think about the way they engage with the public and the way they depict their collections and the way they create their data or they collect their data. And so one of the papers that we recommend you to read in the seminar suggested readings, in the session suggested readings, it's focused specifically on this, on how COVID has had an impact in museums' data and how museums' data had to rethink their data strategies. Especially in terms of organizing the collections, accessing the collections for both the staff, because now the staff is not in the museum anymore. The staff is distributed across the country in many ways, or in many different cases. But also the audience. The audience is no longer coming to the museum and seeing the objects in like physically, but they still engage with the museum. And this was also something that surprised a lot in a way, because even though the museums were closed, people kept engaging with museums. The public and the audience kept engaging with the online collections. They kept visiting the museum catalogs online, and they kept looking at 3D models of the objects, digital exhibitions, and so on. And so I think it's really interesting to see how the COVID has challenged museums to find ways to accommodate these new forms of engagement in a way. But going back to museums data and doing this brief like journey across history, I wanted to go back a bit into what a museum catalog card was a long time ago, and how they are now, how we see them now. So this is an entry for an artifact in the catalog of the Vanuatu Cultural Center. And I took it from this paper by Melanie Roberts on the establishment of a knowledge management system at the Vanuatu National Museum. And in this catalog, we can see how they are collecting this sort of basic information that we know that all museums should collect, or we have in mind that museums tend to collect, like the creator made by, the area, registration date, who used it, who was the collector, when it was collected, the local name for the object, and so on. And so we can see how this collects that sort of information, and this was the standard way of doing it. However, obviously, because we are looking at this catalog card, there are some bits that me at least as a digital curator can like surprise me, or not surprise me, but I see places of improvement or things that can lead to error. So for example, we can see how this could lead to inconsistencies in the way of writing names or places or names of people. It can have typos, it can have data that's missing. It's difficult to see who looked at this record, who edited this record over time. And so these are all things that have an impact, in how the museum collects the data and stores the data. And this is what had an influence in how museums started to think about collections and databases, and how obviously computers can help museums to start collecting their data in a more standardized, consistent, interoperable way for the whole museum and the audience as well. And so in the case of the VM, although I'm in a specific program, not within the VM, but I can speak a bit briefly about the British Museum. And so the first computerization project began in 1966 in the museum, in the Department of Egyptian Antiquities. And over the years, and after several systems, it was extended to other curatorial departments. And in 1979, a section specifically dedicated to documenting the collections was created in the museum. And the museum that we have now is the so-called Museumplus, which other museums use as well. And however, what I want to speak now is the importance that has the museum software, the museum database, in the way that the collection is cataloged and documented. In my perspective, it is a huge improvement because of we can integrate in one same system all the information that's collected about the object. So, for example, registers, records, cards, catalog cards, the pictures themselves, and even the people that has had an access to the object across time. And that's really, really important. These databases also help address the question of inconsistencies and vocabularies, because that is really, really important, because it is very easy to make mistakes when we are writing names or having consistencies across different cards, catalog cards, when we are writing hundreds of them. However, if we keep these so-called authorities or thesauri, we can implement this kind of vocabulary of how things have to be called across the whole data set to be sure that we are being consistent across the different items. And so this is the second example is the collection online of the British Museum. And so, oh no, not yet. And so the British Museum collection online was launched in 2007, and it's kind of the web service of the museum database. And I think it's an amazing thing to be able to have access online to the collection of objects. Not all of them are there, because I think it's more than 2.5 million objects that the museum has, but that the museum displays. But it's really interesting to be able to go and search for any object and explore the data and the metadata that record displays online from home, not necessarily going to the museum. And so I was doing some searches, and I wanted to show this. This is an image of a mouth harp from Cambodia, and I picked this picture because this object is related to one of the AMK projects that we have funding within EMKP, the Endangered Material Knowledge Program. And this is an harp that, as you can see here, we can see it. Oh no, I didn't take the picture of that, but it's part of the Unquote project, which was a project led by Catherine Grant, and it's in Cambodia, and it documents how these mouth harps are made, how they are produced, how they are played, and the whole kind of material knowledge that's associated to the object itself. Because if you have read the papers again, there is this idea of how the objects lose the kind of information about how they were made. In this case, this is an instrument, no? But when we see the object, we cannot really understand how it was played, how it sounded, how it was made, and all this is information that's left aside, no? When we have the object in the museum, or when we see the record in the data set. And so the Endangered Material Knowledge Project is about is about this specifically. It was launched in 2018 with funds from Arcadia, our charitable fund, and it provides grants for projects documenting material knowledge systems that are under threat or in danger of disappearing. So the projects are required to produce this documentation of the processes and practices involved in the creation of those objects, and sometimes that documentation can feed back to the museum collection, as this is the case, and bring context to the object itself, allowing us to see, for example, as I'm showing here, photos of the community members creating the object, the materials, the tools that were used to create this mouth harp, this musical instrument. And I'm going to show you just in a minute a video of one of the community members playing this instrument, which I think is amazing that we can have this kind of contextualization of the object. So I'm going to see if it works. So anyway, going back to, so this is what we do in the program, and that's what we mean by material knowledge, and material knowledge systems associated to the object itself. But going back to museums data, one of the key things that we focus on in EMKP is the metadata. So how we ask the grantees to generate all these data around the assets that they create, to the photos, the videos, the maps, whatever sort of documentation that they generate. We ask them to provide this metadata record attached to it, so that we can understand what that asset records and why it's so important. Because as you may know from the readings, metadata and linked data have this potential to support the information, to support our understanding of the object. So without metadata, in my view, the object and the asset, the digital asset, is very difficult to understand. We won't get the idea of what the object is about. We won't get the idea of all this contextual knowledge that's lost without metadata. And for EMKP, in our specific program, because it is an anthropology program, metadata allows us to go beyond what's visible in the asset itself by also preserving community understandings of place, space, time, social structure. So it gives us crucial information about the object itself, and the asset, the digital asset in this case. And so I am going to show you. So this is one of the assets that we have in the repository, the digital repository, that's linked to the website. That's in the page in the GitHub repository for the session, for today's session. And so here we can see, this is the picture, this is the photo, and on the right we can see all the metadata that's associated to the photo itself. So we can see it's created by Catherine Grant, and we can see the rights owner, the title written in both in English and Comer, but then also we can have information about the participants, the the country, the place, many more materials, date of creation, and so on. And also on the right, we also have keywords that allow better improve the searchability of the assets. So by these keywords, we can easily find assets that are associated to specific terms or themes or subjects. And then is also the license, which is actually really, really important because it allows people to reuse this information to, it is an open access repository, so people can have full access to this data for their own research if they want to. And so that takes us to the next question, which I wanted to talk about, the discussion about the accessibility of the data, the reuse of the documentation and the information that we make available. And in this case, for EMKP, we the documentation records that the projects and the grantees create are stewarded and made available open access on the program's online repository. For anybody to use and reuse for non-commercial purposes. And the key is that when we upload the information, it is under the FAIR principles, which, as you know, stand for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable information. So the open access repository implies that the people or the audience should be able to find the information, access it easily, and this doesn't only mean that they can open the picture and see it. It means that they can see the data behind it, that they can see the metadata, and they can understand what's happening in that picture, on that video. And that kind of challenges the idea that the audience and the public may not want to see the metadata. That doesn't happen. Always some audience, a part of the audience, and every day more public want to see the data, want to understand the metadata behind the object itself. It's not necessarily something that's too advanced or is not interesting. It is interesting. It opens a new and contextualizes the object in new ways. And also interoperable, because we use these vocabularies, this thesaurus, and this list of terms to make the data interoperable between and across data sets, not just our data and our data set, but across data sets. And finally, it needs to be reusable. So it means people can reuse this data for their own purposes by citing it in the proper way and respecting the licenses. And so one way that we have to manage these FAIR principles is metadata, as I said, which is kind of the key to respect these principles. However, as I was saying, our data is open access, and that means that everybody can see it, can access it, can reuse it, can download it in our case, because open access has different levels. This can be somehow problematic in some cases. So although we are looking towards making the data open and fully accessible, open access brings its own difficulties that need to be accounted for and appropriately dealt with. And so we need to consider that open access is a kind of Western developed idea. And not every community is, in our case, because we work with communities, we work with different groups of people from different places across the world. So not every community is going to have our own understandings of what open access is. And so we need to consider that they may not be happy with sharing their knowledge with everybody. There may be different levels of access. And this is all issues that we have come across and that we need to consider at the time to making the data available and the assets available. In this case, things like cultural sensitivities, but also looking after personal information and all that. It's that all those things need to be carefully addressed, and they are part of, in our case, they are considered within a robust workflow of checking the data, the metadata, and the assets to make sure that we are respecting all these principles and that we are checking the data properly before upload to the repository. Yeah, and so those are some of the issues that we were considering when we started thinking about metadata and the repository. And yeah, and I think that's everything I wanted. I think I'm a bit early, but yeah. Thank you very much. Let me just stop sharing.
Lovely, thank you, Paula. That's great. You're not too early at all. That was perfect timing. Great. So we've had a lot to think about there, both in general and in specific examples of some of the sort of questions we're thinking about for this session. So I think there'll be a lot to talk about once we've seen the sort of complementary presentation from Susanne. So I think maybe we hand over to Susanne now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gabi, and also thank you to Paula, because actually you made a very nice. Also, actually, it was difficult to have a very short introduction of what museums are, what they're coming from. So, in your short way, it was perfectly to the point. So, actually, what I would like to do is I will be a little bit in Italian we call this pigra. I don't know the German and the English term. I will just rely on what you said, and I will just focus a little bit on the Turin part. And what I would like to show you is two things. First of all, I would like to present in a PowerPoint presentation what I mean are the argument focusing on ours. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just closing the PowerPoint. The same question. So it was actually what is the topic of our section. So it was already mentioned by Paula and also by Gabi. And I would like to do this focusing actually on two databases on the Museo Egizio and the Egyptian Museum here in Turin. The first is actually what we call Collezione Ricerca. So it's more the online collection, which is, however, related to Museumpplus. And I would like to briefly introduce you to Museumpplus, which has more or less is our Merlin database. So what is for the British Museum, Merlin is for us Museumpplus. And then I would like to focus briefly on the Archivio Fotografico, which is a photo archive of the Museo Egizio, because here it's more in terms of how to use image material, which is really a rather delicate question. And then I would like to focus in, because I'm the curator here in Turin responsible for the papyrus collection. This is why normally, as also last year, I focus mainly on our papyrus collection and on our online presentation. First, briefly, Museumpplus is actually it's actually a database system, museum database system, which was developed by the Swiss company Setcom, and it's actually used by several museums. And
sorry, are we meant to be seeing your slides, Susanne?
Yes, you are. You're not seeing it.
We're just seeing the PowerPoint screen at the moment with your first slide.
Okay, strange. Wait. I will check. What did I do wrong? Okay.
You can start the presentation.
Yeah, maybe if you share the whole screen, maybe that shows the presentation.
That way, because actually I was. Well, let me try this again. So here, what slide do you see now?
We see the second slide, but we also see your slide picker and the whole PowerPoint background.
Yeah,
what's my
slide? Sorry.
You go on presentation mode.
Yes, I'm in presentation mode. Yeah.
So you see your slide filling the screen. We don't.
Yes. Strange. Well, I will. Let's change. Sorry. Let's change into share my whole screen.
Yeah, that
desktop.
That should be
this might work. Maybe because I'm using. Okay, so smile all because now you are online. Okay, let's try this again. How about now?
Yes, yeah. Perfect. We get the whole slide.
Okay,
Thank
good.
You.
Okay, so Museumpplus. So this is what you have to. This was what I was showing before, but anyway. So what we are using internally for our internal museum documentation is a commercial program which is called Museumplus, which was developed by, I think, the Swiss company ZCom. And it was developed for cataloging museum collections. However, the focus structure is focusing a little bit more on art collections, so on on art collections. What you see here is actually an old system which we are still using. It's Museumplus Classic Highlights. There's actually now a browser version which is more modern and actually also more adaptable to museums. However, we are still using the, let's say, older version, which is this version here. I just would like to show you, as again, what is Merlin in the British Museum in London is for us the Museumplus. I would like to show you a little bit how we connect our data. What is the good thing about Museumplus is actually that you can create your own tabs and fields and what are necessary for your collection. So in our case, we have a collection of ancient Egyptian objects, more or less ancient Egyptian, and not of art, of any kind of art artifacts. So this is what, for example, what our introductory slide looks like, and is this the same what Paula was already pointing out, is thanks to the digital age, if you want to call it like this, we already have now the possibility by using drop-down lists and predefined fields to have a very nice structure of data and metadata. What is also taken from Museumplus is, for example, you have the possibility also to connect your entry to the library of our museum. You can connect it also to, for example, to people, and this kind might be, I mean, it was artists. In our case, it's not an artist because we don't have art objects since they're ancient Egyptian artifacts. However, there is a possibility. This is let's say a more negative part of a pre-prepared or created database, which can be adapted to at a certain point. Just to show you some images. So what you have is really like data with the metadata. It's like a general description. And of course, as you see already, there is always a reference photo connected to this, the same as you saw it in the Merlin database. Here you have a direct connection to our museum, the library. If you click on it, you find also actually the position in the library, which is a very useful tool. And again, you have the information about images, and you find also a linking here. You find where the images are stored, because you cannot download directly from Museumplus the images. The images are lying on our server, on our NAS, and you have to open them in from a different kind of server. So, however, this Museumplus data, as you can see it right now, is accessible actually only to us, the staff of the Museo Egizio. So this means no, it's the same like Merlin, no outsider sees this kind of data. As the same as London is doing, the British Museum, is what we also do is we prepare here on our Collezione online. There are some fields taken from Museumplus linked to an online collection. And now I would actually change, and I will show you you can now see the Google browser, right?
Yes.
Gabi? Yes. Okay. Good. I hope it's also big enough for the YouTube reader.
Yes.
So in this case, this is what we have now. We have Museumplus always in the background, huh? And in the background is that, of course, again, it's we are a museum. First of all, this is, as Paula was introducing, is we are an institution which is a public institution. No, actually, we are a private institution, but we are supposed to be open to everybody. This means to the public, to the researchers. And in this case, is also that we have to deliver data, and also following this metadata to different kind of stakeholders. And in this case, is of course is the general public. It's the Egyptologists, which are really the main researchers in general. but also actually in a certain way, it's also the private factor. And I will show you later on why this is the case. So here in this website, you have a general connection to our Museumplus database. However, you cannot see, this is the same what Merlin was, you cannot see all objects which we have in the museum, which are also thousands of objects. You have an access to all the objects on display. So this is, you can search here later. I mean, this is just a research. You can search here and you get pictures from all the objects, and those are linked to Museumplus. If you click, you have this kind of information. I opened now the English version. It's like very general information on the basics, what you have, I mean, which is useful for researchers and in a certain way might be of interest for the general public. And you have the possibility to search and to download the images. I might start before I focus a little bit more on TPOP, because this is where we are a little bit more in detail. Is the images is the same like here. Now we went online a couple of weeks ago actually with the photo archive of the Museo Egizio, which is more about the old images by the excavations done at the beginning of the 20th century. And I will show you just one example. So here you have the images, also different images with the general general description in English and later in Italian, depending on your site, and then the year of excavation and which is a reference to the plate and etc. What is actually new for us, and this is something which we started already, I mean, already before the Corona pandemic, before this, we already had or planned or actually went online with the databases. However, having already provided this online, this of course gave the public at home or the interested layman a great tool in order to do some kind of interested reading, or really also researchers doing really research on it, being at home. What we actually changed now is the credit line. So what we have, and starting by this year, is that the Museo Egizio is actually providing all photographs. So this means from the archive, but also from the general collection database, as from the papyrus database, we are using the Creative Commons 0. This means, as it is very long explained here, you can freely reuse the images for any purpose. So actually, you can do more or less whatever you would like to do with the images. The only thing what we are asking is that to give the museum in the end a certain credit that the picture comes or arrives, yes, from the Museo Egizio. However, this is something you can't guarantee with this kind of credit. So this means our material, which is online, in this case, circa 3,000 objects, plus I can't remember, many thousands of photo archive is accessible online now. And always having the questions in mind is I would like to focus a little bit on data and metadata by focusing on the papyri of the papyrus collection, because this was actually the first database we went online with 4 years ago, nearly 4 years ago. And why do we start with this? Because Museumplus is since it is a prepared a prepared and already planned database. It's not an ad hoc database. It does not fit to the needs, for example, of an papyrologist or an Egyptologist in our case. So as you mean any researcher working on papyrus material. So this is why we decided to create ad hoc a new database, and in this case connected to a website, which is storing our papyri. And this is what we call TPOP, the Turin Papyrus online platform. So this is the website where the website is actually have certain information. But the website is not only a website where you find information, it's also that a little bit similar to the Museumplus general database is here without having access, without asking for a login or to register. You have access to a certain choice of papyri. For now, I think it's about 60 papyri, where you find very general information, such as a description. And this is a discussion of you have an hieroglyphic transliteration, and then you have a translation of the text, and then you have certain information, who did the translation, etc. And this is actually something with which we enter the aspect of metadata. Because also metadata is always a kind of also in going in more detail, giving more detailed information, but in our case also it's an interpretation. And I would like to make this exactly on this entry a little bit more visible. So I will close those tabs here. Is that you see, for example, here, this is one document. We also have, I will show you this later. This is one document. And on this document, there is written in the hieratic script, which is a cursive form of the hieroglyphic script, is written a hymn, is a text written. So because of the process a bit slow, I can't move now, but normally you can zoom in more detail and you can move along the images. Yes, now, like this. As you can see now, this is, for example, not readable for the majority of you, and it's also actually not readable for the majority of Egyptologists who are not specified in reading hieratic script. So what normally an editor and philologist is providing, an editor of the text is providing, is an hieroglyphic transcription. This is something what is not considered, in my opinion, as data. This is a metadata, because it's an additional information to the papyrus, and actually in this case is also an interpretation, because reading the hieratic script, of course, underlies certain rules and methods and lexical research, but it's always a little bit of interpretation how you read certain signs. So this means this editor here is reading this text like this, but another editor would probably change maybe the reading of certain signs. This is, however, this is also providing some kind of meta information for people who can read, for example, hieroglyphs, but are not able to read the original script. The same with the translation. The translation, however, is of course giving the general public or an interested layman who is not Egyptologist the possibility to get an understanding of the text. And the translation is here provided in English. In the database, we provide more translations. So this is what you get from as a normal user if you really go to the website and you open the data. And this is something what we do because the museum in general has a complete open access, open data approach. This means images are provided to anybody without fee. And the same is what we try to do with research data. And what you actually see here is absolute research, because this is the result of a ongoing PhD study of this text by Andrea Fanciulli. So here, just to let you know how the data look like, is actually what you see here. We make two or three separations. We talk about an object. This is what Paula already mentioned. We talk about an object. We talk about writings, and later also we have a field which is called document. Briefly, what is an object? An object in our case is each inventory number what we have. So in this case is for the papyri, an object is not just a papyrus roll. In this case, as you saw before here, is you see actually here the whole document. This document contains 4 fragments, and each fragment is considered in our museum as an object because it has a separate inventory number. And we have to document this kind of situation. And this is what we document with pure data, more or less. So this is, you keep very general information about the inventory number. However, you have the possibility to give more sub-informations about the inventory number or more numbers. So in this case, we enter, of course, also more in the metadata situation. However, even the general public has access to this. This is an access which is given not just to researchers, it's also to the general public, because it is also to each registered user, because this this inventory number system is also useful if you study some kind of our information. Then we have the usual features like measurements. We have features which are very detailed about how a papyrus is constructed. So the objects, the information you find here on the object is actually not connected to the text, it's connected to the pure writing support, to, in this case, to the papyrus. So we have here information which is really focusing on the papyrus, like how many papyrus sheets are preserved and how do they join. This means how they are glued together in order to create a papyrus scroll, etc. We have the possibility to upload additional information on our objects, which of course underlies the free copyright. This is like our old Fabretti catalog, so it's uploads of PDF, the old publications. And what we have here on this is the joy actually of the open data approach by many institutions, and not just as we are, so the British Museum and we in Turin are. We got from the Berlin Academy of Science, we got also, I mean, there's a project which is focusing on, it's a Wörterbuch project. And this project is a project started already in the end, more or less the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century in Berlin, by documenting ancient Egyptian objects and the text written on them. And what they have actually here, and this goes a little bit back to Paula's presentation, is they still have in Berlin, in the Academy of Science, they have this kind of Zettel custom. So they still have the old notes written down with information on what papyrus this is, so where it is stored, and what is the content, and when with the hieroglyphic transcription and the short translation. And thanks to the collaboration with the Berlin Academy of Science, we got a copy of the PDF. We are allowed to hyperlink them, of course, given the appropriate credit. And this is something, this kind of collaboration we also have with Oxford, with the Griffith Institute, where they also store information. And so here on this surface, what we call objects, it's again the very general information on the papyrus support. You already saw here on writings that we make a difference between different kinds of writings. And there is a text on the rector, which is the front side, on the back side. This might be the same text, it might be different text. However, each text has to consider it as different text. And here, this is what I presented briefly, is we have here also the possibility to include many informations which are of importance for users, for collaborators. We work with a lot of Egyptologists worldwide in order to, where they insert data. This is actually something which was not possible. It is not possible with Museumplus. Is you have no access from outside the museum to Museumplus to contribute data. And this is why we created this browser-based platform. Is each user, so each user who's a collaborator has access from home and can encode, for example, this papyrus when he got the rights to do this. And this is as far as it goes to open data, open access, but also, which is important, the collaboration. And also what we have here is, if possible, we are linked to certain other research projects, institutions. For example, there already exists a German translation of our text, and this is linked here. So if you click on this link, you are linked directly to the German translation, and they, on the other side, they linked the entry in their database to our database, where we present the English and, for now, the Italian translation of the text. And otherwise, the database has many bibliographical, of course, references are important. All of them are hyperlinked with the OEB. The OEB is the Oriental Egyptological Bibliography, which is also a project located now alone in Oxford, which is important because by having this OEB number, you also have a direct, because each institution library have a different quotation system. But by having this link, you find at least a very general information on this. Because also one of the so we discussed a lot about the data and metadata, and I think what is data availability, openness, etc. I think this becomes very clear that all those data here are open and accessible to everybody. There are, of course, because there are certain research projects which are funded by third parties, which are focusing on certain papyri, which, for example, are not yet visible to the normal web user who has a registration. For example, those kind of fragments here, they are still under study by a project which is called Crossing Boundaries. Those objects are visible only to the collaborators until we are done next year with the more virtual reconstruction of the documents. And as soon as we are done with this material will be also completely accessible. But also what you see, for example, there is material stored which has this kind of size, which is of no interest and actually will not used by probably nobody, neither the researchers, neither the general public. However, TPOP is not only a tool to give our research tool. TPOP is also what I mentioned before. It's actually the repository, the storeroom, the virtual storeroom, or if you want to call it the virtual museum for the virtual papyrus collection. Now we are having only 5,000 objects recorded so far, and this means we are way to go because there are more than 20,000 papyri fragments, papyrus manuscripts in the museum. However, the long time goal of the museum and also of the papyrus collections, of course, to go on now with all the material. And in this case also, and this is something what we are doing here, is by giving this material openly accessible, we stopped something which was very long common in Egyptology, is to give publication rights to certain objects, especially papyrus objects, to just one scholar. And this normally leads to a publication of one object maybe within 20, 23 years. However, an object or a papyrus scroll like this one here can be of interest for many scholars under different research questions. And this is the idea also of TPOP, is to connect scholars and to give access to the material to all of them, but to connect them to it's in order that there is not an isolated scholar at home working on them, but that they are connected. And this is the hope that they put their data in TPOP in order to make them accessible to others. I think at this point I would stop with TPOP because we can come back to this on during the discussion. And Gabi, if there's still time, I would briefly present you another way how data can be accessible, and this would be the so-called virtual tour.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
And this was actually done during COVID, is because the museum, as we all know, were closed. Some colleagues we created. We created a virtual tour through one of our galleries, and this is the so-called Del Medina gallery. So what you find here, just to give you a general input, so this is the Del Medina room, one of the galleries. And so you can have a 3D image, and it started with different, you have, of course, first, for example, an introduction by one of our colleagues, which is Petrie Collection, who is an expert on the Del Medina site. Del Medina is a village near the Valley of the Kings. In this village, there lived the workmen who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, thinking about the tomb of Tutankhamun, Ramses II, etc. So what you have here, for example, you have you can go through them. You can let me see how this goes. Yes, you can have a look on the objects in general, and then you can click on them to get several information. What kind of information differs? So in this case here, for example, you have a link only to TPOP, only to the database worth the description. Then there are other objects. For example, we have here a very nice object of a wooden object where you find images of the object, which so from 3D, so it's not a 3D reconstruction, it's images. And then you find also from which are downloadable, and then you find more information which are connected to the collection. So here it's from Museumplus. What we also have, which is actually quite nice, I hope I find it now, we have 3D models of some of our objects. I think this might be one. Let me see this. Yes. Okay, we're loading, and which is of course also very useful. So it's not just images and data provide more information, but it's also actually which is really useful, a 3D image, which is not images or normal images cannot give you this kind of impression, because it's also very. I was wondering, can I zoom? Yes, you can zoom in. It's really, you can absolutely zoom in. You see the figures of, this is a statue of Töpfer, so which is a protective goddess from the Medina. And you are also able, in this case, there's no inscription, but you can even zoom in if there's an inscription in the inscription. And then you find, you can share this, and you find even more information on it. So then normally all the objects which are here hyperlinked, as you can see, not all the objects have information, because it might be in the future, only some of them have them. So if you find in this might, you have very, very general information leading you to the collection database. Others, for example, if you see something you have in video here, and here you have everything here is connected to the TPOP database where you find translations of the text and descriptions. Here you find actually a video which explains to you a little bit the papyrus, what is written on the papyrus, and for example, that there is so much more than just you have the German subtitles because my computer is German, but you have actually also Italian, French, and English. It's also more focusing on the backside. So we have made also videos for some of the objects. So it's in general, so you find different kind of information, photos, 3D models, and information on this. So I think at this point, Gary, I might stop, and we might enter in the discussion, and then we can always come back to certain sizes. If this would be okay.
Yes. Over to Monica.
Sorry. So.
Sorry, over to you, Monica.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm here. Okay. Well, so thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. So thank you, Paula, and thank you, Susanne. Well, we can open the discussion. So for our audience, if you have questions, please, you can write them in the chat, and we can answer your questions. In the meantime, I think we can begin with the discussion, and I would like just to go back to the definition that Paula gave at the beginning of a museum, which is a Greek word. And if we think of museums in ancient Greece, we have sources about museums, so they were temples for the muses, but we have sources about in the Academy of Plato or in the Lyceum of Aristotle, and then we can think of the museum in Alexandria. And the interesting thing is that those were not just temples, but research centers, basically, if we want to use a modern term, strictly connected to the library or to a collection or to collections, and gathering scholars. And this is valid especially for Alexandria, but not only if we think of the Aristotelian model. So gathering scholars from many different disciplines, not only the humanities, but also sciences, medicine, biology, etc. And I think that today, and also today in this session, we had wonderful examples. So museums as active research centers producing, not only collecting, but producing new knowledge. So this is what we have. And with the digital revolution, if we want to call it, we have even more opportunities. So we are in this long run from the past to the future. So I think this is super interesting. And today we have seen really wonderful examples. And we can also end by saying that the pandemic was, of course, a terrible situation, but also an opportunity, for example, for the Egyptian Museum to produce this wonderful virtual tour of a few rooms of the museum, giving an opportunity for exploring new technologies and also, of course, allowing people to visit the museum. So this is just a note about, okay, the meaning of museums. I don't know if we have, and I don't know if Paula and Susanne, you have questions for yourselves. I mean, of course, we can also have this discussion if you want. So I don't know if Susanne, you have questions for Paula, or Paula, if you have questions for Susanne, and Gabby, of course. So yeah, Paula.
I'm trying to say it's really interesting what you said about centers to produce knowledge and how the observation of objects, in fact, can generate new knowledge and research by looking at the objects themselves. And also, I was going to say that it's really interesting how the data and the objects that Susanne has presented are so different from the ones that I have presented, and how the data around those is completely different. The approach is different. The people who made them are completely different, and so it's really interesting to reflect. I think it's two really nice examples of data and metadata in museums and digital collections, and how data can be collected and depicted, and what people can access that data. Because it's really nice to see the contrast and think about who is that data for. What's the public, the audience, and what it collects, what information it collects. Yeah.
Also, this is something what I found interesting, because as you said, it's so, your presentation in the end is so different from what I presented, also because you also work with an active culture heritage, and in my case it's an ancient culture heritage. So this means a culture which does not exist any longer. And also, I mean, this is two different approaches. We in general in the Museo Egizio is what we do is we have artifacts of an ancient culture, and we provide also, and actually it's everything what we do is a reconstruction, more or less, of knowledge which we also gained by research. So thinking about the fact that next year we have the 200-year jubileum of deciphering hieroglyphs. So think about that until 200 years ago, more or less, we were not able to read ancient Egyptian texts. This means our interpretation of the ancient Egyptian culture was relied on ancient Greek and Latin Roman authors, of course. So it was not made up, but it relied on stories, on storytelling. Since the deciphering, we are able really to encode this kind of knowledge, and this is why it becomes even more, in this case, becomes even more data and metadata. So I think really when we would, I mean, if we really would try to have this kind of discussion of data, metadata, about maybe Egyptology 250 years ago, it would be totally different, because what I presented now online would not be able possible on a note, on a virtual set. What you said, also what you presented in the beginning, right? How you make one sheet and then you write your information, because those are the basic information, the data in a certain way. And also actually, because I mean, what I presented with the database of the papyrus is really for actually very it's a very close, small group of objects, and which is actually, to be fair, I mean, there are a lot of registered users to TPOP. 2,000 users are registered, but at least 2/3 of them are registered out of curiosity. This is, I mean, there might be 30 researchers really using the data in it, because it's so detailed, it's so complex. Then there might be some students of Egyptology, papyrology looking at it at a certain point. However, for example, in your case, I think you have much more interested laymen, also much more the general public, somebody outside. For example, also like me, I'm not, of course, connected to this, who would be interested in so any person who's interested in some kind of culture. And I think that's somebody I don't have. So it's not that somebody comes by searching the internet and say, how interesting, there is a database about papyrus, let's have a look in it. No, and you really have to need an interest in it. In your case, it's different. So I might stop browsing and looking on, oh, this is an interesting project, because it's, in this case, you have so much more what we would call stakeholders, I think, than I have. And actually, I have probably 3 or 4 with the database. And in your case, I would really suggest that you would really reach with your data and also the way you are accessible. So, for example, the video of the men playing this instrument. And again, this is something you come cross by in YouTube, but it's interesting. It's interesting because it's not just, sorry to say this, a stupid Instagram person who's doing this. No, it becomes by connecting it to your research project, it becomes a huge value and totally different. If the same video would be on Instagram, it wouldn't have the same metadata actually, which is interesting, right? I think also the channel, how you communicate is different. I mean, actually, I can communicate the content of the papyri on Instagram, which would be the same, boring. So it's a papyrus with information. But if you would put this video on Instagram, it would have a different approach if you would put it on your website connected to the British Museum. And it's also really interesting what we can do with open access of material, but also I think really the channels are really of importance of how you interpreted this in the end. I find, Sorry, I was talking a lot, but there might be for now also. But I was really intrigued by your presentation because coming really out of a small hole of papyri and seeing this, it's really interesting. It's really interesting.
Yeah, we hope people find it as much interesting as you do. But yeah, definitely, it is amazing to collect this knowledge. And as you were saying, so. The assets that we collect, for us, they are assets, they are items, but if we link them with the object in the museum, they become metadata, no? Because they bring new knowledge to the object itself. So we get into this circle of what is data, what is metadata. It depends, no, on the lens through which you look at it and the perspective and what information it brings into play, no?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think this whole question of who uses this material, who is the audience, who we expect to use it, that also impacts on what we consider to be data and what we consider to be metadata, and that's part of what's changed. To go back to this idea of what the ancient museum had contained and what the even historical museums, much more recent historical museums, contained and who their audiences were. The idea of a museum to educate the general public is relatively new. The ancient museum was a research center, and that people would go there to research. And it may not have been very clearly distinguished from a museum, but nor was the British Museum until 50 years ago. But the idea that people would go there who had no knowledge and who weren't there to do any research, but to be shown things is relatively new, and that changes then, the idea that there are things that we record about these exhibits that most people aren't interested in has become, and that's not a very good, but it's one definition of metadata, right? It's the stuff that you don't usually show people. It's bits behind the scenes. That's something that's relatively new as well in that case. I mean,
No, I think also because what you said is interesting. Also, as you said that, I mean, the British Museum was visible as a museum already, as Paula knows well, in the 19th century, as were many European museums. I think also Berlin, British Museum, London, Vienna, etc., Turin. But actually, what was there? There was just the object. there was actually not even a didascalia, a node, a label. What is now, of course, we are providing metadata to it. We make interpretations, etc. So at this point, it was really for let's say for the upper class when going through the museum out of curiosity. I think probably some of them also for kind of research interest, but more of curiosity. And this later, of course, changed as soon as we started to label objects. And this happens actually interesting is that the labeling of objects happened in museum studies, as far as I know, with the smaller museums. For example, in Leipzig, you have the Egyptian Museum in Leipzig, which when it was created, it was immediately public. So, and it was already used as university because it was a university collection. So if you think about a museum connected to a university, and you have them a lot in Europe in the 19th century, I think also actually the Petrie Collection, it is one of the earliest collections given by Petrie after the excavation at the beginning of the 20th century, and was established as a university collection for the students for purpose of teaching. However, it was given access also to the general public. And in this moment, there was a communication of knowledge, of metadata. So Petrie Collection, actually also the Egyptian Museum in Leipzig are one of the earliest examples as far as I know. And from the university museums, I talk from the British Museum is different. British Museum as Berlin, for example, also Vienna, they started very early in the end of the 19th century, also with labeling their objects. So in giving more. But however, it was really the researchers at this time were not interested in educating the public. So this is at least what I know from Egyptian collection. There was no interest of famous figures like Champollion, who deciphered the papyrus 200 or object 200 years ago, to educate the public. He was saying, no, I'm interested in research. I want to find this out. But this is also a change. I mean, in this case, we enter in museum studies. And this is of course different. And really what is still, when you consider the fact what happens 200 years ago and what happens now with the project of Paula, where you connect artifacts, but to an active culture, and that can be used, etc., which is a great thing. In the end, what we do in the Museo Egizio in Turin, of course, we do online stuff, which is new. But in a certain way, we are still always related to Champollion 200 years ago. We can't, it's not possible to completely detach from this. This is something we are not able to. I don't know if Paola is, of course, when you rely also on your ancient documentation, on your historical documentation, I think for your case. However, you always have the more tangible culture, and what is not for us tangible. The ancient Egyptian culture is tangible in terms of objects, but not in terms of how would you say, of transmitted knowledge. It's always interpreted knowledge in a certain way. I don't know if I make myself logical in a certain way.
Yeah, no, completely.
Wow.
We have the opportunity to, because it is an anthropology ethnographical project, to interview these communities and these people.
Exactly.
Yeah, and be able to get that knowledge from the first hand, and and I one thing I wanted to say as well is that in many cases is the community itself that wants to record this knowledge, that wants to prevent the loss of it, and wants to make sure that it survives, and it is accessed by further generations, and we can preserve it as well, which is really interesting.
But do you always have, do you always have, let's say, open doors, or sometimes you have, I don't think that it's always easy for you. I can't imagine that there might be also some people who say, oh, okay, we would be interested in keeping our heritage, but we don't know if we like the fact that it is open access. Do you have also this? I think this is also when they say, okay, you can keep it, but please keep it, I don't know, in your database, but hidden. And so it is stored. So we know it is stored, but we don't want to make it open, right? I think this is what you also have, probably.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, like at the end, there are some issues with will not be so confident in sharing all of it because of some other considerations. For example, if some knowledge is only for specific sectors within the community, like for older people or by gender or things like this. So these are all issues we need to consider. And for that, there are some, we could say, protocols, depending on what we want to do, by, for example, preserving the knowledge, but then how would you say, restricting the accessibility. So you would need, we can put embargoes of that documents or that asset so that they cannot be accessed by everybody, but we still preserve them, which is kind of the main, one of the main objectives of the program, to preserve this knowledge for humanity for as long as the museum shall exist, so that we can ensure that it stays and it's preserved. But definitely there are many issues that we need to consider. And another thing I didn't mention, which is key, is to make sure that we are like we keep communication with the grantees, helping them to record all this data, metadata. But it is them, it is the research team that is in the community, and we are in touch with them all the time, and we assess and training. We provide training as well for metadata and data collection and all this to assist whatever we can.
This is, I don't want to interrupt this really valuable discussion. Maybe we can come back to it if we still have a bit of time, but I'm just aware that time is sort of passing. I wonder if we should very briefly talk about the exercise that we promised at the beginning that we'd suggest to people. So we've given people lots of examples of museum catalogues and of online exhibits, and of the various data and metadata in and behind those online catalogues. And what we shall I share my screen just quickly? So this is, if you go to the page linked below this video, if you don't have the Sunaikisis page already, the Sunaikisis page for this session, at the bottom of the page is this exercise that we've proposed. That's this page here. But the exercise we put it on, so basically is to take at least a couple of quite different examples of catalogue records or online exhibits, or digital ways of looking at content in the museums that we've seen in these examples. Maybe think of something that's contemporary, something that's older, something that we have first-hand information about, something that has had to be compiled, the sort of differences that we've been talking about just now, and think about what information is shown in the online version of this, what information is behind it, what's being communicated, what data there is there, what metadata there is there, and who is the audience for the various pieces of information in there, and what information is missing, what information might a different audience be interested in. If this is a very scholarly looking record, what might a general audience be interested in? What might a school child be interested in seeing in there? If it's a very public facing record, what might a scholar want to see that's not in there? So think about and discuss these sort of issues around what choices have been made in this online exhibit or catalogue record or something. And then based on this, and that's a conversation to be had. I mean, if you work in groups or similar, that's a conversation to be had. Then think about something that you would like to create a virtual exhibit of. And obviously we're not asking you to create the online exhibit, but think about one object, one artifact, or one piece of intangible heritage or knowledge that you think would be useful to have an online exhibit about. And think about what you would include in that page: images, description, data, translations, any other kind of information you might want to have of that, what data and metadata you'd want to make available, what data you wouldn't necessarily make available, what licenses, what permissions you would have attached to it, and what audiences you have in mind, and what different things you might make available to those different audiences that you have in mind. And maybe create a mock-up of this, and that could just be, sketched on a piece of paper, saying, the image here, title here, bit of text here, or you could use a PowerPoint slide to do the same sort of thing. It doesn't have to be something that looks like an exhibit, but just to give a sense of the shape of it, and make some notes on the questions that you've been thinking about, and bring this to your class or to your discussion group, or to talk about with someone else, and think about some of the questions that we've been talking about in this session on those terms. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I think it is clear. I mean, I think also we made clear, and everything we presented is visible online. So, I mean, you can get, again, more information. I think we also put in on this site the links to the databases.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
in order to get really more, exactly, there it's the Paula AMKP, the Turin Papyrus online platform, and the virtual tour of the Museo Egizio. So, which might be good for to get some ideas.
And we could add the British Museum catalogue to that list as well. Why not?
Yeah, of course. I mean, which is a fantastic catalogue.
Yeah.
And maybe an interesting thing. So, Gabby, if you go back to the links, maybe you can also try to consider the name of the program of Paula, Endangered Material Knowledge Program. Of course, I know that in your case, endangered is referred to specific cultural heritage, but what do we mean by that today? I know that this is a very big question, but how many dangers we find today, not only for the cultural heritage Paula is working on, but also, for example, for the Egyptian Museum, the British Museum. So there are many dangers, of course, but what do you concretely see? You can try to consider this doing the exercise. And this is valid for data, for metadata, for audiences, etc. But I think that the name of the program is quite significant and can be applied, of course, to many different collections, not only to this specific program where there are today specific issues. So just as an exercise also.
And also, just to add, for the exercise, you don't need to use one of these collections, right? You can use any kind of artifact that you're interested in. It can be in a museum or not in a museum. It can be an artifact from, that you own or have a replica of, or that is, a public object near where you live, or that you've visited. Whatever sort of thing that might be recorded in a museum or in an online museum, and think about how you would present that, and what data and metadata and what audiences might be interested in that.
And I would also say that to try and come up with an idea for the exhibit, maybe they want to do a little research as well, because coming up with ideas for exhibition is a lot of work. It implies a lot of research, a lot of thinking, a lot of discussion. So maybe they want to explore what's there, what they could do, what ideas would be interesting for what people. So having some thoughts,
so maybe for an exercise of this sort of scale, we're not necessarily asking you to go out and do the research that you would need to do this, but at least to think about what more research would you need if this were a real exhibit. What do you not know that you would need to find out to put this in there? What sorts of, maybe audience research, maybe artifact research, maybe consulting specialists, maybe visiting existing museums and seeing what sort of things. So what sort of ways would you gather more information to contribute to?
Even just deciding what collections or online collections you are gonna look for, like search, it's already you're already doing research by saying, okay, I'm gonna be looking at this or that collection. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So for me, I don't know. Do we have more time to?
We have 1 minute.
1 minute.
Are there any questions by if there is somebody online? I don't know. Are there questions? No.
There are people watching live, but none of them have posted questions yet.
Okay. Otherwise, so I will read more online about Paula's project, because it's really interesting, and but I have for now I have no other.
And your presentation as well, the virtual tour. Oh my God, looks amazing.
It's nice, yeah. It's really good. I mean, we try to do something more, but what we are also trying now is to, let's say, focus a little bit more on the physical rooms. So by renovating, doing more, because for now we have visitors, and I think we keep it like this. However, this virtual tour is our virtual tour in general. I mean, it's not just us. I mean, other museums doing it as well. It's really something which is helpful for, interested people in America who can't, of course, come to Europe for many reasons.
Mhm.
So, and this is why we are also focusing on this. And actually, it's also a best tool to make visible the different kind of tools we have. So 3D models, different kind of information platforms, websites, etc. So, and some of the, I did not show that some of the objects are actually related to our online journals, because the Museo Egizio has the Rivista del Museo Egizio, so an online journal. And when an object was focused on in this journal, you can also find information on this. So actually, it's also a little bit selfish, this kind of virtual tour. However, it's useful, I think. Yeah.
This is also a really good segue, as it were, into the next couple of sessions, because next week we'll be talking about 3D imaging in museums and what purposes people do that for research, for display, for conservation. The week after we'll be talking about digital collections, you know, in the sense of whether these are born digital collections or digitized collections and so forth in a more general way. And we'll be talking about 3D modeling. And the week after that, and in the 7th week, in 5 weeks' time, we'll be talking about the reuse of heritage and open licenses. So there'll be a lot of, and in the final week, we'll be talking about virtual reality. So there's a lot of the things that we are going to be talking about over the course of this semester have been teased in this session, I think. And that's a really useful sort of, you know, to be able to refer back and refer forward like that. So it's been really good. So thank you both very much.
No worries.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are we done, Monica?
Yeah, I think we are done. And so, yeah.
Okay, I'll stop the broadcast then.
Mhm.
Okay.
So buona serata.
Thank you all, and see you. I hope you'll join.